The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus Williams approached the pharmacy counter at Westfield Medical Center, his 8-year-old daughter Emma clinging to his arm. Her face was flushed with fever, and she had been crying intermittently for the past 2 hours. The pediatric emergency room had been packed, but after a 3-hour wait, they finally saw Dr. Chun, who diagnosed Emma with acute strep throat and prescribed a critical antibiotic that needed to be started immediately. Marcus clutched the prescription paper in his sweaty palm, the doctor's urgent words still echoing in his mind. Dr. Chun had been clear: without this medication, Emma's condition could worsen rapidly, potentially leading to rheumatic fever or kidney complications. The prescription was for amoxicillin, a common antibiotic, but it needed to be the liquid formulation for children, and it needed to be started within the next few hours. Behind the pharmacy counter stood Janet Morrison, a woman in her early 50s with graying hair, pulled back in a tight bun. She had worked at this pharmacy for over 15 years and prided herself on following every regulation to the letter. When Marcus approached her counter, she was already reviewing several prescriptions from the evening rush, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice strained with exhaustion and worry. "My daughter needs this prescription filled urgently. The doctor said it's critical that she starts this medication tonight." Janet looked up from her work, her expression neutral and professional. She extended her hand for the prescription without saying a word. Marcus handed over the paper, watching as she examined it carefully under the bright pharmacy lights. Her eyes moved methodically across the prescription, checking every detail with the thoroughness of someone who had processed thousands of similar documents. "This prescription is written for liquid amoxicillin," Janet said, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. "I can see that it's dated today and signed by Dr. Chun from the emergency department." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Yes, that's right. Emma has strep throat, and the doctor said she needs to start this antibiotic immediately. Her fever is getting worse, and she can't swallow pills." Janet continued examining the prescription, turning it over to check for any additional notes or instructions. She then walked to her computer terminal and began typing, presumably to check their inventory of the medication. Marcus watched hopefully, bouncing Emma gently in his arms as she whimpered against his shoulder. After several minutes of typing and checking, Janet returned to the counter with a stern expression. "I'm sorry, but I cannot fill this prescription," she announced, sliding the paper back across the counter toward Marcus. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What do you mean you can't fill it? Is it not in stock? Can you order it?" "The doctor said this is urgent." "The prescription is technically valid," Janet replied, her voice maintaining its professional tone. "However, our pharmacy policy requires that all pediatric antibiotic prescriptions be verified through our system, and there's an issue with the insurance authorization that needs to be resolved before I can dispense this medication." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. "What kind of issue? Can't we pay cash? This is an emergency situation. My daughter needs this medication tonight." Janet shook her head firmly. "I understand your concern, but I must follow our established protocols. The insurance system is showing a prior authorization requirement for this specific formulation of amoxicillin for pediatric patients. Without proper authorization, I cannot legally dispense this medication, regardless of payment method." "But that doesn't make sense," Marcus protested, his voice rising slightly. "This is a basic antibiotic. Kids get prescribed this all the time. Can't you call someone? Can't you override the system just this once?" "I'm afraid not," Janet replied, her expression unchanged. "These protocols exist for patient safety and legal compliance. If I were to dispense medication without proper authorization, I could lose my license and the pharmacy could face serious penalties. I recommend you contact your insurance company in the morning to resolve the authorization issue." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "In the morning? My daughter is sick right now. The doctor said this is urgent. She could get seriously worse if she doesn't start this medication soon." Emma began crying again, her small body trembling with fever. Other customers in the pharmacy had begun to notice the commotion, some looking concerned, while others appeared annoyed by the disruption. Marcus felt trapped between his desperate need to help his daughter and the pharmacist's inflexible adherence to policy. "Please," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "Just look at her. She's burning up with fever. Isn't there anything you can do? Any exception you can make? I'll sign whatever forms you need. I'll take full responsibility." Janet's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. "Mr. Williams, I can see that your daughter is unwell, and I sympathize with your situation. However, I have professional obligations that I cannot ignore. These authorization requirements exist to prevent medication errors and ensure proper insurance coverage. If I make exceptions to policy, it could create legal liability for both myself and the pharmacy." The conversation had drawn the attention of other pharmacy staff members. A younger technician, Sarah, approached from behind the counter, having overheard the discussion. She looked between Janet and the distressed father with obvious concern, but remained silent, knowing that challenging her supervisor's decision could result in disciplinary action. Marcus felt his options running out. He pulled out his phone and showed Janet the urgent care instructions Dr. Chun had given him. "Look, the doctor wrote here that this medication needs to be started immediately. Doesn't that override the insurance requirement? Isn't there an emergency protocol?" "I've reviewed the prescription thoroughly," Janet replied. "While I acknowledge the doctor's instructions, my responsibility is to ensure that all medications are dispensed according to proper procedures. Emergency protocols do exist, but they require specific documentation and approvals that are not present in this case." The standoff continued as Marcus realized that Janet was not going to change her position. He looked down at Emma, who had grown quieter but was clearly feeling worse. Her skin was hot to the touch, and her breathing seemed more labored than before. The emergency room doctor's warnings about potential complications echoed in his mind as he considered his next move. Other customers in line were becoming impatient, and Marcus could feel their disapproving stares. He knew he needed to find another solution, but with most pharmacies closed at this hour and Emma's condition potentially worsening, his options were severely limited. The weight of responsibility for his daughter's health pressed down on him as he faced the reality that this pharmacist's strict adherence to policy might seriously endanger his child's well-being. Marcus stood frozen at the pharmacy counter, holding his feverish daughter while processing Janet's refusal to fill the prescription. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, almost harsh, as the reality of the situation sank in. Emma's condition was clearly worsening. Her fever felt higher, and she had become listless in his arms, no longer crying but simply lying against his chest with labored breathing. "There has to be something we can do," Marcus said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Can you call the doctor? Can someone override this system? My daughter is getting sicker while we stand here arguing about paperwork." Janet remained unmoved behind the counter, her professional mask firmly in place. "Mr. Williams, I understand your frustration, but calling the doctor won't change the insurance authorization requirement. These systems are automated, and the prior authorization must come from the insurance company directly. Even if Dr. Chen calls, I still cannot dispense the medication without proper clearance." Sarah, the young pharmacy technician, shifted uncomfortably nearby. She had been working at the pharmacy for only 6 months, but she had never seen a situation quite like this. The prescription was clearly legitimate, the child was obviously sick, and the father was genuinely distressed. She wanted to say something, but challenging Janet's authority could cost her the job she desperately needed to pay for college. "How long does a prior authorization typically take?" Marcus asked, grasping for any hope of a solution. "Usually 24 to 72 hours, Janet replied matter-of-factly. "Sometimes longer if additional documentation is required. The insurance company needs to review the medical necessity and ensure that less expensive alternatives have been considered first." Marcus felt his stomach drop. 72 hours? Are you serious? Look at my daughter. She doesn't have 72 hours to wait for some insurance bureaucrat to decide whether she deserves medicine. "I understand your concern," Janet repeated, her tone suggesting that the conversation had reached its end. But these are the procedures I must follow. Perhaps you could try calling your insurance company's emergency line, though they may not be able to process authorizations outside of normal business hours. Emma stirred in Marcus's arms and looked up at him with glassy, unfocused eyes. "Daddy, my throat hurts really bad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "When can I feel better?" The question broke Marcus's heart and steeled his resolve. He looked directly at Janet, his voice becoming firmer. "I need to speak with your supervisor. This is unacceptable. My daughter has a legitimate prescription from an emergency room doctor, and you're refusing to fill it based on insurance technicality." "The pharmacy manager left for the day," Janet replied. "I'm a senior pharmacist on duty, and this decision falls under my authority. I'm sorry, but my answer remains the same." At that moment, an elderly man in line behind Marcus spoke up. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. That little girl looks really sick. Isn't there some kind of emergency exception for situations like this?" Janet turned her attention to the other customer. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but pharmacy regulations don't allow for subjective judgments about patient conditions. We must follow established protocols for all medication dispensing." The elderly man, who introduced himself as Robert Chun, ironically sharing the same last name as the emergency room doctor, was a retired physician himself. He had been observing the situation with growing concern. "Young lady," he addressed Janet, "I practiced medicine for 40 years before retiring. That child shows clear signs of systemic infection. Delaying antibiotic treatment could lead to serious complications." "I'm not qualified to make medical diagnoses," Janet responded stiffly. "That's why we have procedures in place. If there's a legitimate medical emergency, the patient should return to the emergency room." Marcus nearly exploded at this suggestion. "Return to the emergency room? We just spent 3 hours there. They diagnosed her, prescribed medication, and sent us here to get it filled. We're going in circles while my daughter gets sicker." Dr. Chin stepped closer to the counter. "May I see the prescription?" Marcus handed him the paper gratefully. The retired physician examined it carefully, noting the diagnosis, medication, and dosage instructions. "This is a straightforward case of pediatric strep throat requiring standard antibiotic therapy. The prescription is appropriate, and the urgency notation from the emergency physician is clear." "I respect your medical opinion," Janet said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But as a licensed pharmacist, I have legal obligations that supersede medical recommendations when it comes to insurance compliance and medication dispensing protocols." Sarah watched this exchange with growing discomfort. She had learned in pharmacy school about situations where rigid adherence to policy could potentially harm patients, but she had never witnessed such a clear example. Her training told her that patient welfare should be the primary consideration, but her employment required her to support her supervisor's decisions. Dr. Chun turned to Marcus. "Have you considered trying another pharmacy? Some larger chains have different insurance networks or may have more flexibility with emergency dispensing protocols." "At this hour?" Marcus replied. "Most pharmacies are closed, and the few that are open are across town. By the time I drive there, it could be another hour or two. I'm worried about how much worse Emma might get." The situation had attracted more attention from other customers and staff. A young mother with her own children looked sympathetically at Emma's obvious distress. Another customer checked his watch impatiently, clearly frustrated by the delay in service. Janet noticed the growing crowd and the attention the situation was receiving. "Mr. Williams, I'm going to have to ask you to either accept my decision or leave the pharmacy. You're creating a disturbance, and other customers are waiting for service." "A disturbance?" Marcus's voice rose. "I'm trying to get medicine for my sick child. If wanting to help my daughter is a disturbance, then yes, I'm creating one, and I'll continue creating one until someone with authority and common sense can help us." Dr. Chin placed a calming hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Perhaps there's another approach. Could you call the emergency room and have them provide additional documentation that might satisfy the insurance requirement?" Marcus pulled out his phone immediately. "Yes, I'll try that. He dialed the emergency department, while Janet watched with obvious disapproval. When he reached the nurse's station, he explained the situation and was told that Dr. Chun was currently with another patient, but could possibly call the pharmacy within the next 30 minutes. The doctor will call you soon, Marcus told Janet hopefully. Maybe that will help resolve this authorization issue. Janet's expression remained unchanged. A call from a physician won't override the insurance system requirements. The authorization must still come through proper channels. As they waited, Emma's condition continued to decline. Her fever seemed higher, and she had become almost completely unresponsive, barely acknowledging when Marcus spoke to her. Dr. Chun observed her condition with growing alarm, recognizing the signs of a child whose infection was progressing rapidly. The tension in the pharmacy was palpable as customers, staff, and the desperate father awaited either the doctor's call or some other resolution to what was becoming a medical emergency unfolding in real time. The pharmacy had grown uncomfortably quiet except for the steady hum of refrigeration units and the occasional beeping of equipment. Marcus stood near the counter, gently swaying back and forth with Emma in his arms, trying to keep her comfortable while they waited for Dr. Chen's promised phone call. Emma's breathing had become more shallow, and her skin felt increasingly hot against his chest. Dr. Robert Chun, the retired physician who had intervened, remained nearby, discreetly monitoring Emma's condition. His medical instincts were deeply troubled by what he was witnessing. The child's deteriorating state was exactly the kind of progression that emergency antibiotic treatment was designed to prevent. Janet continued processing other prescriptions, maintaining her professional routine despite the ongoing crisis at her counter. She had dealt with difficult customers before and had learned to compartmentalize emotional situations from her regulatory responsibilities. In her mind, she was protecting both her license and the pharmacy's legal standing by strictly following established procedures. Sarah, the young pharmacy technician, found herself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. She kept glancing between Emma's obvious distress and Janet's unwavering stance. Finally, she approached Marcus with a suggestion. "Sir, I know this might not help right now, but there's a 24-hour pharmacy about 15 minutes away. They might have different insurance protocols." Marcus looked at her gratefully. "Thank you for trying to help, but I'm worried about taking Emma on another car ride when she's this sick. And what if they have the same insurance issues?" Before Sarah could respond, the pharmacy phone rang. Janet answered with her standard professional greeting. "Westfield Pharmacy, this is Janet speaking." The voice on the other end was Dr. Chun from the emergency department. "This is Dr. Chun calling about Emma Williams. I understand there's been an issue with filling her antibiotic prescription. I'm calling to provide additional medical justification for immediate dispensing." Janet's tone remained formal. "Doctor, I appreciate your call, but the issue isn't medical justification. The insurance system requires prior authorization for this specific medication formulation. Your call doesn't override that requirement." Dr. Chen's voice became more urgent. "I'm documenting this prescription as medically necessary for immediate treatment. The patient has acute streptococcal pharyngitis with risk of complications if treatment is delayed. I'm willing to provide any additional documentation required." "I understand the medical situation," Janet replied, "but insurance authorization must still come through the proper channels. I cannot dispense medication without following our established protocols, regardless of medical circumstances." Marcus could hear parts of the conversation and felt his hope fading. Dr. Chen had tried to help, but Janet's position remained unchanged. He looked down at Emma, whose eyes were now closed, though she wasn't sleeping. She seemed to be conserving energy, which worried him even more. The retired Dr. Chen stepped forward again. "Janet, may I speak with you privately for a moment?" His tone was respectful, but carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in medical situations. Janet hesitated, then stepped a few feet away from the main counter. Dr. Chen spoke quietly but firmly. "I've been practicing medicine longer than you've been dispensing medications. That child is showing signs of systemic progression. If she develops complications because treatment was delayed due to insurance bureaucracy, There will be serious questions about the decisions made here tonight. Are you threatening me? Janet asked, her professional composure showing the first signs of strain. I'm not threatening anyone, Dr. Chen replied calmly. I'm simply pointing out that there's a difference between following proper procedures and allowing those procedures to potentially harm a patient. Most pharmaceutical licensing boards recognize that patient welfare takes precedence over administrative requirements in emergency situations. Janet felt a flicker of uncertainty for the first time that evening. She had always prided herself on following rules precisely, but the retired doctor's words carried weight. She glanced back at Marcus and Emma, seeing the child's obviously declining condition. At that moment, another customer approached the counter, a woman in scrubs who appeared to be coming off a hospital shift. She had overheard enough of the conversation to understand the situation. "Excuse me," she addressed Janet. "I'm a nurse at Children's Hospital. I couldn't help but notice what's happening here. That little girl needs medical attention." Janet now found herself facing multiple medical professionals, all expressing concern about her decision. The situation was becoming more complex than a simple insurance authorization issue. "I appreciate everyone's medical opinions, but I still have regulatory obligations." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from his wife, who was working late at her own job. "How is Emma? Did you get her medicine?" The simple question hit him like a physical blow. How could he explain that he was standing in a pharmacy, holding their sick daughter, while a pharmacist refused to dispense prescribed medication? He approached Janet once more, his voice quieter but filled with emotional intensity. "Please, just look at her. Really look at her. She's getting worse while we stand here. I'm begging you to find some way to help us." Janet finally looked directly at Emma for an extended moment. The child's flushed face and labored breathing were undeniably concerning. For the first time that evening, Janet felt a crack in her professional certainty. But her training and years of strict protocol adherence made it difficult to deviate from established procedures. "I understand this is frustrating," Janet said, her voice slightly less certain than before. "But if I dispense medication without proper authorization and there's an audit, I could lose everything: my license, my job, my career. These regulations exist for good reasons." Dr. Chun stepped back into the conversation. "Janet, in 40 years of medicine, I've learned that there are times when the right decision requires courage. Yes, there might be administrative consequences for making an exception, but there will certainly be consequences, moral and possibly legal, if a child suffers because bureaucracy prevented proper medical care." Sarah watched this exchange with growing understanding. She was witnessing a real-world example of the ethical dilemmas discussed in her pharmacy classes, the tension between regulatory compliance and patient welfare. Her textbooks had made it seem clear that patient welfare should always come first, but the reality of employment, licensing requirements, and legal liability made the situation far more complex. The standoff continued, but the dynamics had shifted. Janet was no longer dealing with just one frustrated parent. She was facing multiple medical professionals, concerned customers, and her own growing doubts about the absolute correctness of her position. Emma's condition provided a ticking clock that made every passing minute feel more crucial. As the tension reached its peak, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, speaking loud enough for everyone in the pharmacy to hear. "I need to report a medical emergency at Westfield Pharmacy. My daughter has been denied essential medication, and her condition is deteriorating." The emergency call electrified the atmosphere in the pharmacy. Marcus's voice carried across the space as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher, providing the address and describing Emma's deteriorating condition. Janet's eyes widened in alarm. This was escalating far beyond a routine insurance authorization dispute. "Sir, what exactly are you doing?" Janet demanded, her professional composure cracking for the first time. "I'm calling for help," Marcus replied firmly, still speaking to the dispatcher. "My daughter has a legitimate prescription for antibiotics that could prevent serious complications, and the pharmacy is refusing to fill it based on insurance technicalities while she gets sicker. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but urgent. Sir, is your daughter currently experiencing a medical emergency? Do you need an ambulance? Marcus looked down at Emma, whose breathing had become more labored. I think so. She's burning with fever, barely responsive, and the emergency room doctor said she needed this antibiotic immediately. That was over an hour ago, and we still don't have the medication. An ambulance is being dispatched to your location, the dispatcher confirmed. Please stay on the line. Janet felt panic rising in her chest. The situation was spiraling completely out of control. An ambulance response would mean official documentation, incident reports, and potential scrutiny of her decision-making process. Mr. Williams, this is unnecessary. You're creating a crisis where none exists. Dr. Robertson stepped forward, his medical authority clear in his voice. Janet, this isn't about creating a crisis. This is about preventing one. That child's condition has visibly worsened in the time we've been standing here. Sometimes the system fails, and human judgment must prevail. Sarah watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as the situation unfolded. This was not what she had expected when she took a part-time job to help pay for school. She found herself questioning everything she had learned about pharmacy protocols and wondering whether strict rule following was always the right approach. Other customers in the pharmacy had stopped what they were doing to watch the drama unfold. Some looked sympathetic to Marcus's situation, while others seemed concerned about the disruption to normal pharmacy operations. The nurse in scrubs had moved closer to assess Emma's condition and was clearly worried about what she observed. How long until the ambulance arrives? The retired doctor asked Marcus. They said about 5 to 7 minutes, Marcus replied, then addressed Janet directly. You still have time to do the right thing. You could fill this prescription right now and prevent this from becoming a bigger emergency. Janet felt trapped between conflicting pressures. Her years of training emphasized strict adherence to protocols, but the mounting evidence that a child was suffering due to those protocols was becoming impossible to ignore. Even if I wanted to make an exception, the computer system won't allow me to override the authorization requirement. Sarah suddenly spoke up, surprising everyone, including herself. Actually, there's an emergency override function. I learned about it during my training. It requires supervisor approval and special documentation, but it exists for exactly this type of situation. All eyes turned to the young technician. Janet stared at her in shock. Sarah, you're not qualified to make decisions about override procedures. I'm not making decisions, Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. I'm just stating what I learned in my pharmacy technician certification program. Emergency overrides exist specifically for situations where patient welfare is at immediate risk. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. The young lady is absolutely correct. Most pharmacy management systems include emergency protocols for situations exactly like this one. Janet, you do have options available. Janet felt cornered. Her authority was being challenged by a part-time employee in front of customers and medical professionals. The sound of approaching sirens in the distance added urgency to an already tense situation. Using emergency overrides requires justification and documentation that will be reviewed by corporate management and potentially by licensing boards. Then, document it, Marcus said desperately. Document that a child with acute strep throat needed immediate antibiotic treatment to prevent complications. Document that the emergency room doctor emphasized urgency. Document that multiple medical professionals confirmed the need for immediate treatment. How is that not sufficient justification? The sirens were getting louder now. Janet realized that within minutes, emergency medical personnel would arrive and begin their own assessment of the situation. Their documentation would become part of an official incident report that would be much more difficult to explain than a simple emergency override notation. Dr. Chun made one final appeal. Janet, I understand your position. Regulatory compliance is important, and you're trying to protect your license and career. But consider this. If EMT personnel arrive and determine that this child's condition has worsened due to delayed treatment, that will also be documented. The licensing board will want to know why emergency protocols weren't used when they were available and appropriate. The retired physician's words hit their target. Janet had never considered that refusing to use available emergency procedures might be just as problematic as using them inappropriately. She looked around the pharmacy at the faces watching her. Marcus's desperate concern, Emma's obvious illness, Dr. Chen's professional authority, Sarah's earnest hopefulness, and other customers' growing judgment of her actions. Emma stirred in Marcus's arms and opened her eyes briefly. "Daddy," she whispered weakly, "I don't feel good." That simple statement from a suffering child finally broke through Janet's rigid adherence to protocol. She looked at her computer terminal, then back at the prescription Marcus had placed on the counter hours earlier. "If I use the emergency override, I need your agreement to sign documentation stating that you requested immediate dispensing despite insurance authorization delays." "Yes," Marcus said immediately. "I'll sign whatever you need. I take full responsibility." Janet's fingers moved reluctantly to her computer keyboard. "Sarah, I need you to witness this emergency override procedure and document the medical circumstances that justified its use." Sarah nodded eagerly, relief flooding her face. "Of course, I'll document everything." As Janet began entering the override codes, the ambulance sirens reached their crescendo outside the pharmacy. Emergency medical personnel would arrive within moments, but now they would find a family receiving proper medical treatment rather than a bureaucratic standoff that had endangered a child's health. The sound of the approaching ambulance served as a stark reminder of how close this situation had come to becoming a true medical emergency, one that could have been easily prevented with earlier action and more flexible interpretation of pharmacy protocols. The pharmacy doors burst open as two EMT personnel entered with their emergency equipment, scanning the scene quickly to assess the situation. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 30s with short brown hair, approached Marcus immediately while her partner surveyed the environment and other people present. "I'm Amanda, with City Emergency Medical Services," she announced. "We received a call about a child having a medical emergency related to medication access. Can you tell me what's happening?" Marcus felt a wave of relief that help had finally arrived, even though Janet had just begun processing the prescription override. "My daughter Emma has strep throat. She was prescribed antibiotics in the emergency room, but we've been here for over an hour trying to get the prescription filled. She's getting worse." Amanda knelt down to Emma's level, introducing herself gently to the child before beginning her assessment. She checked Emma's temperature with a digital thermometer, examined her throat with a small flashlight, and listened to her breathing with a stethoscope. Her partner, Miguel, took notes and monitored the overall situation. "Her temperature is 102.8 degrees Fahrenheit, Amanda announced. "That's significantly elevated. Her throat shows obvious inflammation, and I can see enlarged lymph nodes. Her breathing is slightly labored but not critically compromised yet." Dr. Robert Chun approached the EMT team. "I'm Dr. Robert Chun, retired physician. I've been observing this child's condition for the past hour, and she's shown progressive deterioration. The pharmacy was initially unable to fill her antibiotic prescription due to insurance authorization issues, but they're processing it now." Amanda looked surprised. Insurance prevented filling an antibiotic prescription for a child with obvious bacterial infection? "That's correct," Dr. Chin confirmed. The pharmacist cited prior authorization requirements that would have delayed treatment for potentially several days. Miguel, the second paramedic, addressed Janet directly. "Ma'am, what was the specific barrier to filling this prescription?" Janet, who was still working at her computer terminal to process the emergency override, looked up nervously. "Our pharmacy management system flagged the prescription for prior insurance authorization. I was following established protocols for medication dispensing compliance." "But you're filling it now?" Amanda asked, noting the activity at the pharmacy counter. "Yes," Janet replied, her voice smaller than before. "We're using an emergency override procedure." Amanda and Miguel exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They had seen situations where bureaucratic procedures had interfered with patient care, but rarely so directly and obviously. Amanda continued her assessment of Emma, while Miguel began documenting the circumstances for their incident report. Emma, can you tell me how you're feeling right now? Amanda asked the little girl gently. Emma looked at the paramedic with glassy eyes. My throat hurts really bad, and I'm really hot. I want to go home. I know, sweetie. We're going to help you feel better. Amanda reassured her, then turned to Marcus. When did she first develop symptoms? Yesterday evening she complained about her throat, but this morning her fever spiked, and she couldn't eat anything. The emergency room doctor was very clear that she needed to start antibiotics immediately to prevent complications. Sarah approached with a processed prescription bottle, having completed the emergency override procedure under Janet's supervision. The medication is ready, she announced, handing the bottle to Marcus along with information sheets about proper dosage and administration. Amanda examined the prescription bottle and nodded approvingly. This is exactly what she needs for streptococcal infection. The dosing is appropriate for her weight and age. She turned to Marcus. You can give her the first dose right now. Do you have water? Marcus nodded gratefully. Accepting a small cup of water from Sarah, following the instructions, he measured the liquid antibiotic and helped Emma take her first dose. The little girl made a face at the taste but swallowed the medication without resistance. How long before this starts helping her? Marcus asked Amanda. Antibiotics typically begin reducing bacterial load within a few hours, Amanda explained. You should see some improvement in her fever and throat pain within 12 to 24 hours. However, it's crucial that she takes the full course exactly as prescribed, even after she starts feeling better. Dr. Chin stepped forward. Marcus, I recommend you monitor her temperature closely tonight. If her fever exceeds 103 degrees, or if she shows signs of difficulty breathing, don't hesitate to return to the emergency room. Miguel finished his incident documentation and approached Janet. Ma'am, I need to include in our report the reason for the delayed medication access. Can you explain the insurance authorization requirement that prevented initial dispensing? Janet felt deeply uncomfortable with the scrutiny her decision was receiving. Our pharmacy operates under strict regulatory guidelines. Insurance authorization requirements are designed to prevent inappropriate medication dispensing and control healthcare costs. But emergency overrides exist for situations exactly like this one, correct? Miguel pressed gently. Yes, Janet admitted. Emergency overrides are available when patient welfare is at immediate risk. Amanda looked up from her continued assessment of Emma. Based on this child's presentation and the timeline described, I would say patient welfare was definitely at risk from delayed treatment. Streptococcal infections can progress to serious complications if antibiotic treatment is delayed. The implications of Amanda's statement hung in the air. Janet realized that the EMT incident report would document not only Emma's medical condition, but also the circumstances that had led to the emergency call, including her initial refusal to fill a legitimate prescription for a visibly ill child. Marcus felt immense gratitude toward everyone who had helped them through this crisis. Thank you, he said to Dr. Chun, Sarah, and even to Janet. I know this got more complicated than anyone expected, but the important thing is that Emma finally has her medicine. Amanda completed her assessment and began packing her equipment. Emma's vital signs have stabilized, and she's received her first dose of appropriate antibiotic therapy. I don't see any immediate need for emergency transport to the hospital, but I strongly recommend follow-up with her pediatrician tomorrow. As the EMT team prepared to leave, Amanda addressed the entire group. This situation highlights the importance of putting patient welfare first, especially when dealing with children's health. Emergency protocols exist precisely for circumstances like this, and they should be used when appropriate. Dr. Chun shook Marcus's hand. Take care of that little girl. She should start feeling better soon, but don't hesitate to seek medical attention if you're concerned about her condition. Sarah watched as Marcus and Emma prepared to leave, feeling proud that she had spoken up about the emergency override procedures. The experience had taught her valuable lessons about the importance of patient advocacy and the courage required to do the right thing, even when it means challenging authority. Janet remained at her station, processing other prescriptions and trying to return to normal operations. But the evening's events had shaken her rigid adherence to protocol, forcing her to confront the reality that strict rule following could sometimes conflict with patient welfare. She knew that her decision-making process would be scrutinized, but she also recognized that using the emergency override had ultimately been the correct choice. As Marcus carried Emma toward the pharmacy exit, the little girl looked back at the people who had helped her. Despite feeling sick, she managed a small wave goodbye. The bottle of antibiotic medicine in Marcus's pocket represented more than just medication. It was the result of multiple people choosing to prioritize a child's health over bureaucratic convenience, demonstrating the power of human compassion and professional courage in overcoming systemic barriers to patient care. The incident would be reviewed by pharmacy management, insurance companies, and medical authorities, but the immediate crisis had been resolved. Emma would recover from her strep throat, and the adults involved had learned important lessons about the balance between regulatory compliance and patient welfare in emergency medical situations.